views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Straight ahead on this edition of Perspectives, a Pew survey showed that President Donald Trump's ratings have moved from 83% to 78% when it comes to evangelical support. Now, President Trump had overwhelming support from the white evangelical community. Some say it was because he supported religious freedom. Others say it's because of his Supreme Court picks. Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we go front and center with the issue of the evangelical church, religion, and politics, and how it played out in the presidential election. Stay with us. Perspectives starts now with yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let them know.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. And as always, you can watch Perspectives right here on BronxNet's Channel 67. If you have Verizon Files, of course, that's Channel 2133. And you're always welcome to check us out on the web at bronxnet.org. And yes, also, social media, we're there. You hit us up on all of our platforms. You can go to Perspectives. My personal platform is DC Jaime 23. There you can find me, as well as on Instagram and Twitter. And then my Facebook page, Daren C. Jaime. And there you can get some information as well as some inspiration. Well, coming up front and center on the show, we talk about the election. President-elect Joe Biden has won with numbers in Georgia, with numbers in Pennsylvania, and of course, taking on Michigan, being able to come across and carry out and win the presidency. Well, a lot of questions still remain in the aftermath, particularly with numbers. I want to talk about the Edison polls. The Edison polls in religion talks about 52% of all Catholic voters went for President-elect Biden, but the recent presidential election, 47% voted for President Trump. And the AP Votecast estimates an even split among Catholic voters, with 49% voting for Biden and 50% for Trump. And so the question is, talk about religious freedom, talk about social justice, talking about how does this all play out? And when we look at the numbers, it seems as though the evangelical community definitely voted in favor of President Donald Trump. A lot of people ask the question, how can a religious group vote for somebody who's got a lot of moral issues? Well, here to make sense of that and then some, we're pleased to be joined by a very special guest. He is none other than the Reverend Malcolm J. Byrd. He is the pastor of the Mother African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Harlem, New York. He is also the chief of protocol for the AME Zion denomination. And Pastor Byrd, good to have you back here on Perspectives.
I'm thrilled to be here, my brother. Thrilled to be back on your broadcast.
Thank you. Let's get right at it. First of all, let me just get your reaction to the election of President Joe Biden.
Well, first of all, without question, the great idea of honest democracy came alive the other day when it was finally announced that Kamala Harris, along with Joe Biden, would take new leadership at the helm of our nation. We have been praying for it. We had been working for it. We'd been in the street advocating for it. And it really showed the resiliency of the American spirit after what historians will later call and acknowledge as relatively 4 difficult years under the previous administration.
Yeah. And now we know that President-elect Biden will be taking office, but not without controversy. Of course, we know recounts in several states because the votes were just simply that close. But when we look at voters and the demographic of voters, a lot of questions come to the surface, particularly in the area of the evangelical denomination. Looking at evangelical voters, they voted in favor of President Trump, given the fact that he's had several moral lapses, a lot of things that can be said about him. When you compare him to President Obama, you've got a person that, for all intents and purposes of this conversation, flawless in terms of character. But then when you see a person like President Trump, a lot of things to bring to the surface. But yet and still, evangelical voters voted for him, and in an overwhelming fashion. What are we to make of this?
Well, first of all, we have to first look at this historically. Politics have always been strange comrades in American democracy. It were prominent clergy persons throughout the North and South who allowed slave owners to remain comfortable while brutalizing their enslaved Africans, using the Bible as a tool to keep people enslaved through the means of poor exegesis for commerce and political gain. So this is really nothing new. But in modern American culture, what you see is a new religion of patriotism masquerading as evangelical thought, where in the United States in 2020, evangelical religion has very little to do with the things of eternity or the things of God, or reasonably deducing where heaven or hell may be. It really is all about how to secure white supremacy and to ensure that it stays alive for another generation. And the best vehicle to do that in a Western American context is to use religion as the vehicle to get you there.
And when we look at what's happening right now, a lot of people say, listen, you know what? I can't believe that they went this way, that they voted in favor of a president who says that they'll grab women by, you know, their intimate parts, that'll, you know, freely kiss on women against their will. When you have somebody like that, and yet and still, they still get the vote punched for them, and the evangelicals are being questioned as to their moral compass, if you will. What we hear a lot of times is the fact of that he is also, President Trump, pro-life.
Well, if we had more time, I would talk more about the pro-life standing, which you will discover if you do some further research in this particular area. You will discover that this pro-life stance, largely by evangelicals, has nothing to do with the protection of unborn babies. It really is to ensure that white supremacy can continue to live, because if you look at the numbers, it's largely white women who are making visits to Planned Parenthood and what have you in that regard. But the issue here is, how do we ensure that white faces will continue to be the dominant ethnic group in America? And at the rate we're going right now, by 2040, that will not be the case.
When we talk about political allegiance, I want to ask you a question about political allegiance, because, you know, as a church, the church has always been a dominant staple in America. But how much is political allegiance actually crippling us as a church?
Well, I don't believe that is the case, let's say, in the case of Black religion. There has never been among the Black church, and of course, there is no one Black church. We are Black people, but we have different minds, different beliefs, political and religious. But for the most part, in a Black religious context, there is no discombobulation between the religious and the political. Black clergy persons have always assumed a very important role of being prophet, speaking truth into an atmosphere of chaos, which is what a lot of our clergy persons have had to do. The issue here is this idea of separation of church and state. What does that mean in our national context? I would say, without question, religion has always driven American politics. Let's talk about the rise of the religious right with the Jerry Falwells and the Pat Robertsons and Jesse Helms and other prominent senators, Talmadge McDowell out of Georgia, and how they began to really shift American politics with the Bible in both hands, shaping the culture of our nation politically, not at all for religion, though they told people that, but to really shape it to fit the standard for white supremacy.
We're going to take a quick break with Reverend Malcolm Byrd. He's our guest here on Perspective. Stay with us. Coming up, we're going to talk about religion, politics, also the Reverend Raphael Warnock, a key figure right now in the race for the Senate. That'll be when we return right after this. We're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. Our guest today, the Reverend Malcolm J. Byrd. He's the pastor of the Mother African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Harlem, New York. He's also the chief of protocol for the AME Zion Church denomination. And he's been sharing with us a little bit about religion and politics, and particularly the evangelical vote. Reverend Byrd, let me go here and talk to you a little bit about this here. When we talk about what we face right now, we know that America is in abeyance. We're in hole right now. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen based on these two Senate races that are going to take place and in coming out of Georgia. One of those persons, the Reverend Raphael Warnock, the famed pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To see a pastor engaged in politics, some people say, I don't know. But talk to us about why a pastor is engaged in a political forum.
Well, first of all, that might be a new concept in other cultures within our nation, but clergy involving themselves politically as candidates and even to hold public office is very much a part of the Black religious political religious ideal. He would undoubtedly be the first Black clergy person that I know to serve in the U.S. Senate, at least at post-Reconstruction, but most certainly not the first in Congress. I know Dr. Warnock very, very well. I've spoken to him regarding his candidacy very, very early in his candidacy. And without question, I believe that he brings every possible good thing to the table to ensure that the U.S. Senate would have the numbers that we would need to have to actually make some necessary and needed changes in the direction of our nation.
Yeah. And when we talk about him coming out of the church of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who had his own engagement politically and socially. And when we talk about a person such as a Reverend Warnock, we look and we see one who says, listen, I just can't just do it in the community, but I have to do it in the political realm. as well. Talk to us about that political realm and the church, because there is that separation between church and state. How do we separate church and state? And, from your perspective, amidst what we're going through right now?
Well, in all honesty, the best example of how to effectively keep the church separate from the state is to really take a good look at what the evangelicals actually did with the religious right. Just take a look at their playbook. They were able to almost endorse political candidates from their pulpits. They were able to do so much from their framework because they knew the law and they knew exactly how to say what they wanted to say without advancing upon things that would affect their non-for-profit or tax status. But without question, some of the greatest leaders that have ever come from the Black community were also clergy persons as well. And a Black clergy person must not only be theologically astute, but we must be aware of law. We must be aware of politics. We must be aware of business. The average urban Black pastor essentially has an MBA, whether we have an MBA or not, because there are certain things you have to know and understand. The most diverse person and the best person to do the job politically in many respects, who has learned how to deal with different groups of people, is without question Black clergy people. We are the most prepared persons to go into public office, without question.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw the fastball at you. You're gonna have to respond real quick to this one here. 81% of voters, evangelical voters, actually voted, as we said in the beginning, for President Donald Trump. In a political realm, people say, listen, my job is to try to capture votes. What can Democrats do to possibly capture the vote of evangelical voters?
I think the Democratic Party really has to do, in the words of the late James Howell Cone from Union Theological Seminary, Democratic Party must really do an assessment of their own life. What are they willing to lose to gain a new future and new followers? I'm really not convinced the Democratic Party can do much to invite racists across the line. At the end of the day, there are persons who are just innately racist, and there's nothing you will ever do to be able to convert them. And a racist will stay where they are and raise all kind of Cain in the party that they are in to push their issues, or as they would like to call them, values. But it's really hard to pull a racist across the line to have to coexist with thoughtful and intelligent minorities. They just refuse to do that. They would rather remain ignorant on their own.
Give me your thoughts about Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, the first African-American and woman of Asian descent to actually now take the office of Vice President. From your perspective, how do you see that?
I've made it very, very clear. We always do well as a people, as a nation, when we trust Black women. And when I went in to cast my vote, I casted my vote for the Harris-Biden ticket. And so I made it very clear in my own mind and my own soul, I was really doing this not only for the future of our nation, but for every marginalized Black woman throughout the history of our nation. I did that without question with them in mind. I worked with her in San Francisco when I was the minister out there, and she was our district attorney. And what you see in her now, she has always had an incredible care, an incredible concern for her community. And she has not been one of these figures who's been outside of the community looking in. She's always been a part of it and has always had marginalized people at the center of her focus, always.
Do you see her making a legacy impact, if you will, in Washington?
Without question. It's not just Washington, but I want not only young Black girls, but I want young Black boys to see a decorated and distinguished Black woman holding a position such as that. The effect, the Kamala Harris effect, is, and it's everywhere now. Everyone has bought into this wonderful, wonderful thing. I think she's going to make it very, very far. If you look at some of the latest cabinet appointments that have already been into nomination. Without question, I know for a fact a lot of those sisters getting on that list, that was undoubtedly Kamala Harris's influence. I'm not sure the Biden party prior to Kamala Harris even knew some of these persons even were, but I know that she knew who they were. And I think she is opening doors for other sisters and other highly intelligent minority persons who under the previous administration were barred from leadership opportunity.
Coming back with our conversation with the Reverend Malcolm J. Byrd, pastor of the Mother AME Zion Church in Harlem, New York. We're talking religion and politics. We'll be right back in a minute. Back here on Perspectives, Daren Jaime here with you. Our guest today, the Reverend Malcolm J. Byrd, pastor of the Mother AME Zion Church in Harlem, New York. And Reverend Byrd, I'll get your perspective. I should say, Pastor Byrd, I'll get your perspective on this here as we get ready to move towards 2021. Obviously, as we talked about, that Senate race is going to be very huge, and voter turnout is going to be huge. But give me your perspective on this. In the Black church, there's something that's called souls to the polls. Were you satisfied with what you saw in regards to souls to the polls? If it's somebody who doesn't know what souls to the polls are, please explain.
Thank you. First of all, I was incredibly pleased with Souls for the Poll effort. We have clergy brothers and sisters in cities all over the nation who would worship with congregants, let's say through Zoom or whatever distance mechanism. They would worship together, then they would all agree, let's say on a Sunday, to go to do early voting together. Though Souls to the Polls have really gotten its name in, let's say, in the last decade or so, but there was always an effort in Black communities to engage the faith community, to use their right to engage their voice through the ballot, through voting. And so what I saw here in Central Harlem, where I live and where I serve, literally there was a line literally around my polling place on 135th Street. There was a line around the block. So you talk about turnout. I never thought I would see turnout like this again in a post-President Obama era here in America. But without question, we got into the streets. We stood in line for hours, even in the rain, to cast our votes. And so I was very, very happy and very proud, at least of the Black community, in making some things happen. And if I can also say, it's that same Black community in Philadelphia, in the areas around Atlanta, in Milwaukee, in Detroit, the same marginalized Black persons who were ignored and denuded and disrespected under this previous administration, who made sure that it was our community that really pushed those numbers towards the Harris-Biden ticket, ultimately to victory. And I don't think that should be forgotten.
Yeah. Do we see the same level of participation going forward? I mean, obviously a seminal moment when President Barack Obama was elected.
Yes.
Another seminal moment, if you will, now with Kamala Harris being elected.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that we need to see diversity at the top in order for us to be partakers and participators?
That is a very, very good point. I really think that the most helpful thing to get persons voting in such mass numbers has been really to have been an American and have experienced what life has been like over the last 4 years. Most people went to vote were motivated by the fact of losing parents or relatives through COVID-19. They were motivated through many and various ways. Whatever their motivation was, they went out to vote. What we really have to do now, and what many of us are focused on now, is increasing voter turnout or encouraging those same Georgia voters to go back to the ballot box again and vote in January. And a number of us are focused on ensuring that persons are registered in the state of Georgia right now. In fact, I'll be going down there in a few weeks or so to help push and encourage that effort down there. We cannot let this fire die out. It's good to have Kamala Harris and the VP's residence and Joe Biden in the White House, but it would really be good for our nation to really get some things done. And we cannot get some things done if the U.S. Senate remains blocked to progress and change. So we have to keep the fire going.
Yeah, I got a couple minutes left, but let me go to another subject right now. I know that you've been directly impacted. Your church has been directly impacted as we see these COVID numbers beginning to rise across New York City. Talk to us about the impact COVID-19 has had on your church and the message that you want to send.
We very early on, we began to lose members of our church to COVID-19. And it has been devastating to us, not being able to grieve properly, not being able to be there and support persons as they made that transition. And we were one of the first faith communities in New York State, actually in the country, to be open to holding COVID testings within our church when it was still relatively a taboo subject. And so 1,000 persons or so were tested for COVID-19 at Mother Zion Church at the end of May into June, because it really spoke to what we believe the Black church should be all about. If we're dying in droves, if we're sick, if we are ill, we want to do all that we can to ensure that our doors are open, that even independent of a religious context, we acknowledge that the health, the wholeness, and the sanity of all people for us is social justice, and social justice is God's work. And so we are committed to that. And we're committed, even as we continue to push through COVID-19, to hold town hall meetings like we did the other day with medical doctors regarding what's right and wrong about things we're hearing about the vaccine. So we are committed in our community to help us walk through this challenge of COVID-19 together. And we have been doing it since the beginning, and we will continue to do so.
All right, the Reverend Malcolm J. Byrd, we got to leave it there. Thank you, my brother, for being with us here on Perspectives as he continues to give us his perspective on religion and politics. And that about wraps up for this edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime. Of course, we want to wish you a very happy Thanksgiving, a very happy Thanksgiving holiday in the midst of all that's going on. We got COVID-19, but if you're watching this, you do have life, health, and strength. So celebrate life. Take care. Share your perspective with somebody else. You just don't know. It might make a difference in somebody else's life. We'll talk to you soon.